Welcome everyone to our Research Impact Series webinar, Insights from the Raine Study. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather here today at the University of Western Australia. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and recognise their enduring connection to this land. We also extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from other nations who are joining us today. As we come together to introduce the Raine Study, we reflect on the rich history of knowledge, inquiry, and learning that the Whadjuk Noongar people have sustained for tens of thousands of years. Their deep understanding of the land, its ecosystems, and the importance of community and well-being continues to inspire and inform. At the Raine Study, we are committed to fostering an environment of collaboration and respect, where diverse perspectives and knowledges are valued and integrated into our research endeavours. By working together in this way, we honour the legacy of the Whadjuk Noongar people and strive to build a better future where health research and innovation are grounded in mutual respect and understanding. So, my name is Romola Bucks, and I have been the director of the Raine Study since late 2020. Welcome to all who join us online today. I'm here with Associate Professor Rebecca Glauert, the Raine Study's Scientific Director. Also joining us today are two very, very special guests, Alison and Tara, who represent volunteer participants from the first and second generations of the Raine Study who give their time and their data to this study. They'll share their experiences as participants in this very distinctive study. So today, we're taking a really deep dive into the Raine Study's legacy and contribution. It began in 1989, and it is now the oldest and longest running successful multi-generational pregnancy cohort study in the world. The Raine Study is a partnership of all five Western Australian universities with the Telethons Kids Institute and the Women's and Infants Research Foundation. And research outcomes from this study have had international impact. We'll hear about some of those in just a moment. But to date, just a few data points for you. The Raine Study data have influenced over 300 health and education policies and practices worldwide. We currently support 87 international researchers and 461 Australian researchers, with 326 of those being based in Western Australia. And in 2023, which was a big year for us, we began our largest multi-generational follow-up ever, bringing back not just Generation 1, the original mums, or Generation 2, the children, now adults born into the study, but the children of the children, Generation 3. And so we're moving into a phase where we'll be able to offer health researchers unparalleled access to rich and truly meaningful data across 3 generations, with a little bit of data from the grandparents as well. And this enables groundbreaking research into a whole host of diseases and disorders, such as the potential heritability of fatty liver disease, glaucoma, and the intergenerational transmission of, say, depression, anxiety, and sleep disorders. We're fully based in Perth, and we have almost 7,000 participants, and they range from babies to 70-plus-year-olds. And they all provide us incredibly detailed information, questionnaire data, clinical assessment data, biological samples such as antenatal and cord blood, milk teeth, blood and other bodily fluids. And these include from the Generation 3 children. And this makes this study absolutely unique. And the longer that the Raine Study can continue collecting data, the more the study can grow and the more impact it can have that can contribute to health outcomes in society. So let's get started. Before we do, just a note for you, any questions that audience members have for the panel, please can you submit them via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, as there's going to be an opportunity at the end for some questions to be put to our fabulous panelists. So without further ado, let me introduce Associate Professor Rebecca Glauert. Beck, tell us about the origins of the Raine Study. How did it come about?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here today to talk to you about the Raine Study, which I'm extremely passionate about. The Raine Study really is about passion. It has been about passion for about 35 years. So in the, I would say probably the 80s, a young Professor John Newnham, who probably wasn't a professor then, but was an obstetrician working at King Edward Hospital, he was noticing that a lot of babies were being born preterm or low birth weight, and he kept thinking, why is this happening? The time before pregnancy and during pregnancy, it must mean something. And he kept asking the questions, and he kept being told, no, it doesn't. So doesn't mean anything. And he was determined to find out. And as serendipity often plays a role in some of the best things in life, he happened to be at a dinner party, I believe, I hope I'm getting this story correct, with the accountant of Mary Raine. So Mary Raine was a West Australian, and after she passed away, she actually bequeathed her holdings to the University of Western Australia, and they set up the Raine Medical Research Foundation. So at this this meeting, this dinner party, John was told that the Raine Foundation was actually looking at funding something really aspirational, one really big thing. And he thought, well, here's an idea for you. So along with Lou Landau, Con Michael and Fiona Stanley, John and the team put together a grant, and they were successful in receiving funding from the Raine Medical Research Foundation, which is where we have our name, the Raine Study, and that's where that came from. So I think it's an incredible story. And from that, they began to recruit women who were 18 weeks pregnant from King Edward Memorial Hospital. So they recruited nearly 3,000 women who were pregnant at the time. And so alongside this aspirational cohort study to look at the impact of early life or before birth on children's outcomes and babies' outcomes, they also wanted to look at the impact of ultrasounds on the developing fetus. So at the same time as they got the foundation funding, they also received a Health and Medical Research Council fund to look at the impact of ultrasounds.
So that was just a study to look at ultrasound and the impact on children's development in utero, and maybe to follow up. But that was 1989 to 1990, and we're now 2024. So I'm sure there's more of this story we're going to hear about. But I'm really interested that you talk about the importance of the Raine Foundation funding this and having that vision. Philanthropy sounds like it might be quite important to the story of the Raine Studies. So what role does philanthropy play in the Raine Study? How important is it to the activities of the Raine Study?
Well, it's absolutely vital. I mean, we simply wouldn't have existed in the first place, and we certainly would not have continued to exist 35 years later. Most cohort studies start and end within 5 to 10 years. So the fact that we are going still 35 years later and we have 4 generations of participants, I think speaks volumes to the generosity of mainly West Australian philanthropic organisations. So just in the last few years, we have been so fortunate to have received funding from the Telethon 7 Trust, who have helped us recruit our 3rd generation of participants, the McCusker Charitable Foundation, who have just been incredible in supporting our science portfolio, the Stan Perrin Charitable Foundation, who are helping us with our biological samples and staffing, and Lottery West as well. So all of those incredible philanthropic organisations in Western Australia have helped us keep this West Australian gem alive and shining bright.
Thank you, Beck. But I think we must, forget for 1 second that there's another kind of philanthropy, if you like, which is volunteered time. And I think this is the right time to introduce one of our fabulous Generation 1 or Gen 1 volunteers, Alison. Welcome, Alison. So you were one of the originally 3,000 mums recruited at 18 weeks pregnant. How did you get recruited to the study? Can you tell that story to us?
Well, it wasn't very exciting, actually. I It was my third baby. I was pregnant. You know how it is. You stagger in. And I I do remember the obstetrician telling me about this study and said, "You'd be keen on this, won't you?" And I said, "Oh, yes, yes." And here I am, 33 years later, being keen on it.
That's fabulous. So when you started back then, did you have any idea you'd still be involved nearly 35 years later?
Not at all, not at all. I imagined that it was an ultrasound pregnancy study, and then they said, well, we'll be following the children up. And I thought that was a wonderful opportunity to have all my child's development checked and documented. So I thought that was rather good. And then each time there was something else great that you thought, I must stay in this study, because how wonderful is this to be involved in the next bit and the next bit. And I'm still saying that, how great it is to be involved in the next bit and the next bit.
Yeah, so you stole my next question. I was going to ask you why you keep coming back.
Because it's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's not only interesting, but it's worthwhile both for me, my son, and the community. I really love the research we've done. And so as such, I feel like that's my giving, that all of us like to give somewhere. And I feel very grateful for the opportunity to give.
Thank you. And we're very grateful for the fact that you have given for so many years. You talked a little bit about some of the research findings being interesting. Is there anything in particular that resonated with you, that intrigued you about the findings over the last 35 years that you can share with us?
Well, what intrigues you changes with time. When you've got a little one, you're more interested in the findings on breastfeeding, which, by the way, showed that you were less likely to, as a child, to have ear infections if you were breastfed. And then as time moves on, you look at development and diet. And we've found that teenagers who have a healthy diet do better in school. We know instinctively a lot of these things, but until you actually have the figures to show them, you can't say to people, you must do this. That children who exercise have stronger bones. It's not a surprise, but we needed the figures to say that. And as we go on now, we've moved more with some mental health findings, because our generation 2, our children, are in that very busy time of life where they've got partners, they're building a career, they're starting to have children. And so some findings on the mental health side will become important too. So I don't know that there's one thing that stands out as, wow, this was incredible. It's just each time I read one more thing, I think, oh, wow. And we have been the people who've helped that happen.
Thank you so much. That's a fantastic list of good things and good reasons to keep coming back. So when your child was a baby and a young child, you brought him in. But then as he got older and more able to make a choice, was there ever a point when you thought, I'm not going to persuade him to come in? How did you manage to get your child to participate along the way and for so many years?
I think, as you say, when they're little, you just say, right, we're off now, hop in the car, sort of thing. And as they get older, I do remember blood tests being a bit of an issue. He wasn't terribly keen on the blood tests, but if you approach it correctly with, wow, look what we're going to find out. And as luck would have it, my child has a very strong interest in science. And so as he got older, it actually made more sense for him to be coming. And as a lot of them said, and you got a day off school, that made a big difference too. So I didn't have a lot of trouble convincing him to continue with it, because it was interesting. And there've been a lot of little things along the way. Before your time, the Gen 2 participants were encouraged, they sent them out a little stretchy wristband, and they were encouraged to wear it to school on a particular day, and they found their cohort mates. They sort of walked around and went, "Are you a Raine Study?" You know, sort of people they knew, but it's not something you discussed that you were in the Raine Study. So then it made them feel part of a team. And so that made it even more important that they continued.
Thank you so much. And yes, it's also a very involved part of the Raine Study, for which we're incredibly grateful. Thank you, Alison. So back to you, Beck. We talked quite a lot about some of the findings that have been published historically, but I'm also interested in, what is it the Raine Study is working on now? What are your current priorities that you'd like to work on, and what are you already working on now? So kind of two questions in one there. Start with what are you working on, and then you go to priorities.
Okay. I also just wanted to come back to Alison just to make a point. I thought it's interesting you saying that your son is interested in science, so was interested in science, and I wonder how much his involvement in the Raine Study helped him create that interest, and whether that's influenced him kind of longer term.
Interesting to know, really. He's taken a very different career path to his older brother and sister, and where I think there has to be some part of being involved in a study that makes you aware that science is worth doing.
Thank you. And I think this is one of the things that I'm actually personally really interested to look at is, from talking with a lot of Raine Study participants, we're seeing a lot that are sort of have gone down that health and medical research or just area in general. And I find that really fascinating. And so I'd love to do a study on that. At the moment, Romola already mentioned we're doing our largest ever follow-up. So we have our generations 1, 2, and 3, thanks to the Telethon 7 Trust coming in now. So, we're very, very busy. But there are some really key things that we're interested in. And these have really also been driven by our participants. So we engage really, really closely with our participants, and we do. We did a survey of them about 2 years ago, asking them what they were interested in. Some of the key things that they have indicated they're interested in is mental health, and we know that there is a significant increase in mental health concerns and issues in our population, particularly amongst younger people. And that's one, as a psychologist, that's something that I'm particularly very interested in as well. So to look at intergenerationally how that is, what are the impacts of parental mental health, or what are the early influences and intergenerational influences of mental health on our citizens. Also, another really interesting study that we're desperately trying to get funded at the moment actually is around fertility. So our cohort has been one of the most phenotyped cohorts in the world around looking at menstruation and sperm, so looking around fertility issues from an early age. So we did a study when the girls were about 15 and they had ultrasounds, and when the boys were about 22 they provided sperm samples, and we looked at at fertility issues there. And actually, concerningly, only around 14% of the boys in the sample met the World Health Organization's guidelines for sperm quality, and that's very concerning. And this is a trend that is actually going on across the world, but we won't know about it unless we can utilise cohorts like the Raine Study to investigate this further. So, our participants are now at their peak fertility age. So they're 33, 35, which we know is around peak fertility in Australia. We're bringing in our generation 3s. We know there are about 900 already, and we know that in the coming years there'll be more and more. So we really want to start now looking at the fertility. We know that there's increases in endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome. We know that 1 in 20 children in Australia now are conceived via IVF. So what are the impacts of those sorts of things? And we can tell you actually what the impacts are. With one of the studies that Roger Hart conducted, he used the Raine Study cohort as a control cohort against babies who were born via IVF, and really reassuringly to all of those people who have conceived via IVF. There was no difference between, the mental health, the cardiovascular health, the thyroid function of those babies who were born via IVF compared to our Raine Study cohort, so the general population. So, the value of the Raine Study and having these data going back so far and what we can do in the future is just so exciting to look at.
Thank you, Beck. So this brings us very nicely to our next wonderful guest, Tara. So Tara, you're a Generation 2 participant, which means that when your mum was recruited, you were in her womb at 18 weeks. And then after the birth, you've come back and you've kept coming back to see us basically for your entire life.
Well,
That
yes.
is some commitment.
Oh,
So,
look, it just becomes who you are.
Part of your identity.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. So, we've got to see along the way the amount of research that's been pulled from there. And I think, as we've got older, I absolutely echo everything that Alison has said. That's definitely been my experience. You were pulled along for a few years, and then after that, you realised that you were going to get a glass of juice and a toastie. And then as you really found the value in health and research, you kept going. And so for now, it's just about creating that legacy, which, that the information that we have by just existing, we can offer 2 hours of our life every couple of years, and it's invaluable. And the amount of data, that they've pulled, Prof Newnham having that concept that pregnancy begins before, like your life actually does exist before you're born in pregnancy. That's groundbreaking, because that's such common knowledge now. And if we look at the exponential growth in the data that we have, it's amazing just from our cohort.
Okay. Folks, I'm having trouble with my sound, so I'm going to try and put on a headset and see whether that solves the problem. If you could just bear with me a moment, and I'm sorry, everyone. And I'm sorry for interrupting.
Right. Is that
Perfect.
better?
Yes.
I am so sorry. Technology is wonderful until it's not. So Tara, thank you so much. I am so in awe of you that you continued in this study through your teenage years and now into your adult years. And not only that commitment, but that you committed by bringing your own children into the study. So what decided you to introduce your own offspring as the third generation of the Raine Study? What was that about?
It's an absolute no-brainer. So, interestingly enough, my background is medical. So I did nursing. So I nursed alongside Prof Newnham and Roger Hart. So every time that there was a bit of research published, that was great. So I've got a 12-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl, and for them, they are old enough. And I have always given them up-to-date information, been really consent-based, and given them adequate explanations for their medical procedures and the things that they went through. So they also have an interest in health, and they were interested to come along and see what I had been a part of. I don't think that they quite understand it. But again, when we go there, both of my children, even though their age was, given consent forms. And so they were told, what was going to happen to them, what was going to be used with that data, and they could provide consent to a level. Obviously, I provide that overarching consent, but they were given that as well. So knowing that their information, de-identified, explained to them, was going to be used to change lives, they were quite happy to be a part of it.
That is so amazing. So thank you so much. And back to you, are there any things that you learned about yourself during the follow-up that you have reflected on as significant for you, maybe about what you're interested in, or about some of the findings or the experience that you can share with us?
So I spoke to Prof Newnham about it, and he was saying that the Raine Study has given us so much information, that we're so much more proactive in our healthcare, and our knowledge and understanding of how, our body works and how health works, and evidence-based medicine. So for me, I recognised in my family that there was breast cancer that went through. So my grandmother passed, and then my mother has passed in recent years. And I thought, you know, there must be a genetic factor there. So for me, having the information that actually doing something about it and being able to be proactive in your own healthcare and make decisions to shape your own future, I think, you know, that's obviously a really big one, but there's been, you know, ones along the way that have then, you know, changed little things on making my lifestyle better, making my sleep better, all of those kinds of things. But, you know, going from an 80% lifetime risk of breast cancer to being able to have prophylactic surgery has brought me down to a lifetime risk of 3%. So, you know, that has changed. The Raine Study has changed my life in how I look at healthcare, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's fabulous. So thinking of the future, Tara, and then I'm going to come to you, Alison. What research from the Raine Study would you like to see next? What would you like? What questions would you like us to ask the scientific community to ask of the Raine Study?
Look, I love the fertility factor. I think that by the time that my children are having children, it will be, you know, I imagine that they will be older. There will be more things involved in that there's, you know, different things that can go wrong, you know, having that older age. And I'm interested in their modifiable risk factors versus the ones that are genetic. So the ones that have been passed down from my mum to me to them. So I'm really like to see basically any of that multi-generational data that we can have, and looking at the genetic component. That's something really interesting to me.
Thank you. What about you, Alison?
Well, along similar lines to Tara, as the parents are getting older, as the Gen 1s, we have the opportunity to look at things like heart disease, diabetes in the parents in an attempt to prevent the children from getting those. So not just the Gen 2s, but the Gen 3s, the babies of the children. So given that the parents come in each time there's a cohort follow-up, we have bloods, we have ultrasounds, and if we could find a way to prevent our children going through having heart disease, diabetes, liver disease, if we could even remind them that these things would happen, then that would be wonderful. That's how I would think.
Yeah, I share that vision with you. I'm a dementia researcher, and if we could understand the early life predictors of later life dementia and prevent it, wouldn't that be absolutely amazing? Okay, so thank you so much. So Beck, I'm going to come back to you just a little bit to talk about a bit more about some of the sort of research highlights and their impact. We've already touched on this a little bit more, but I know there's so much more to talk about. So you've talked about ultrasounds, you've talked about the fertility study, which is fabulous, the IVF study. What other exciting and influential findings have there been over the years, and in particular ones that might have influenced policy or practice in healthcare?
I think, I mean, I know we sort of mentioned the ultrasound, but I think, you know, as the first real study of the Raine Study, I think it's really critical to understand that probably everybody that listens to this webinar will have been influenced by the data and findings from the Raine Study in some way.
That's a bold statement.
I know it's a bold statement, but I'm going to back it up.
Okay.
Particularly around the ultrasounds. So, you know, the finding was that actually having multiple ultrasounds when medically indicated during pregnancy is a safe practice. And what that has meant is that for anyone who is having a complicated pregnancy, that these women can have multiple ultrasounds. So we are finding out more about the developing fetus. And in addition to that, the data from from the Raine Study babies, from Tara and all of her cohort, actually set international standards for fetal growth, intrauterine fetal growth for decades. So anyone who's had a baby, been a baby, or knows someone who was a baby, which is pretty much all of us, yes, has in some way been influenced by those studies. And I'm constantly finding things that people I didn't even know. So my daughter has hypermobility, and I organised a physiotherapy appointment with a paediatric physiotherapist. And I must have sent it from my phone, and it had my work signature attached to it. And she said, "Oh, I saw that you're, affiliated with the Raine Study. Do you know everything that we know about hypermobility and developmental coordination disorder? We know because of the Raine Study. And at every conference, we're talking about the data from the Raine Study." And I thought, wow, isn't that amazing how widespread these findings are? And even the World Health Organization has used Raine Study data to determine physical activity guidelines. And in fact, they're using our data at the moment. We're just about to give them some data around gestational weight gain and gestational growth. So, it is influencing world policy and guidelines. And sorry, it is a bold statement, but I'm standing by it.
I think I'm persuaded. So can I just remind the audience who are listening to pop any questions you might have in the Q&A, because we're going to get to that in not a long time. So let me just move on. So generation 3, and I guess we've started recruiting generation 3, the children of children. So Tara's 2 children, and that, as I understand, is a world first, isn't it, Beck?
It is.
Tell us a little bit more about the generation 3 and what makes it such a world first.
Yeah. So, we are the world's first pregnancy cohort study. So birth cohort, so we're the first study to actually follow that pregnancy across, the life course to now 33, 35. The fact that we have so much information on not only the babies born into the study, but also their parents. We have detailed information around sleep, around physical activity, around diet, and this is across the life course of the parents of generation 3, so our generation 2s. So we know almost everything there is to know. We actually know if they've got tattoos and where they are. We know if they kick a football with their left or right foot. What that will tell us about the future health of their children, I'm not sure. But we also, but all of these things that we know about our generation 2 participants are so critical to then what is going to happen to generation 3. I mean, where the world is changing, it's ever changing. And in fact, it's changing at a much faster pace, I think, than it probably ever has. And, we know that a large proportion of children are going to have some kind of a health or physical or mental health issue in their lifetime. So if we can really better understand that by looking at the parents and looking at the lifestyle decisions and and how those impact the next generation, then I really think that we've got some groundbreaking research to happen here. And I'm so excited about generation 3, not only for the children, because they actually do get that feedback around their own health and development and well-being, and their parents get that information as well. But, for the international community, I mean, some of the main issues that are facing children, young people are very concerning. We're seeing really high rates of obesity, high rates of mental health issues. We're actually staring down the barrel of the next generation being worse off than our generation. And that is deeply concerning to me. And so we need to understand why and what it is that we can do to fix that, with environmental impacts, all of these things that we can better understand through recruiting generation 3. So, and because of all the information from generation 2.
Thank you. So Tara, what about you? What are you hoping that we'll be able to answer now that we're bringing in generation 3, perhaps?
I think it's along the lines of what Beck was saying, like in terms of having those, what can we intervene with at this level with our young people to change their health outcomes. So quite interested in the cardiovascular stuff. When I had my testing done, there was a few things that, despite me being, fit and healthy and exercising 5 times a week, that some of those markers actually came back high. And so that's obviously a genetic component that I might pass down to my children. I don't think anyone in my house sleeps well. And, as we learn more and more about the data around sleep, that affects your mental health, that affects your risk factors for obesity. So, having something like that, and, should we all be on melatonin to make sure we sleep, or is that just us? Or, it's just one of those things that at the moment it's, we've got a little bit of information and we understand that it causes health outcome problems, but what are they? How do we change them to then better the next generation? I think that would be really important.
Thank you. Alison, what opportunities do you think Generation 3 and the data we're now collecting from there offer us?
I think, like Tara, that preventative health, because we've got the figures from Gen 1 and Gen 2, if we see it happening in the little ones, we've got a chance to intervene. And I think that is so wonderful that we don't have to wait, like in my generation, for the disease to be treatable. We can hop in early, and that's what I would like to see happen, is that my grandchildren are able to be helped before it's an issue, much like Tara would like that intervention.
Thank you. Yes, I think you've both put those points very, very powerfully. So I kind of want to come back to you both, Tara and Alison. I'll start with Alison. You know, you not only volunteer your time, but you also volunteer your input to how we use the data that we've collected from you. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's been like, being part of the process of decision making around the science and how we use the data?
Well, I'm a member of the community committee. We have a committee which is comprised of both Gen 1, the original mothers or fathers, and Gen 2, the children of those who are now in their 30s. We have a committee that we discuss what we would like to be done, but more appropriately, what we're not keen on. I'm also part of the scientific review committee, where researchers send in their proposals. And one of my jobs on that committee is, I believe, to protect the cohort. If I see something coming up that I think is not fair on the cohort in terms of time, in terms of being invasive of their information, of not feeling safe to me, then it's my duty to speak up.
Yeah.
And then I take that back to the community committee and say, look, what do you think? Give me all your opinions, because I'm only one voice. But I think in having those two committees, we have protected the cohort. We've not asked them to do things that are inappropriate, and we've not allowed our information to be used for research which we wouldn't want to be associated with. So unless it's good, clear research, and unless it's got good motives and it's going to be used well, then we're not very keen on allowing our data out for it.
Thank you.
So I think that's how we are protecting our members and allowing them to continue on and feel safe.
Thank you. So Tara, knowing that about the way participants have been involved, can you just briefly say, has that influenced, or how has it influenced your involvement in the Raine study, about knowing about the participant contribution to the decision-making process?
Well, first of all, thanks, Alison. Thanks for mumming us and looking after us and keeping us here, essentially. But we are that age, we're that middle age. We've got friends that are this age. We can see the problems coming through with our parents, our children. So being able to provide feedback on things that we feel are important as an educated cohort is, really, really good.
Thank you so much. So now, if you don't mind, wonderful panelists, I'd like to turn to some of the questions from the audience. Keep them coming in the Q&A. So let me start with, the first one isn't a question. It just says, it says, thanks for the presentation. That's great. Is the Raine study open to new participants, Beck?
Unfortunately, no, unless you are the child of a Generation 2 participant. So we are a birth cohort. So the people who were born into the study and their parents and their parents' parents and their children are the people who are in the cohort. So no, we're not recruiting other people. We're following up the lives of 3,000, 6,000, 8,000 West Australians who have been born or coerced by their parents initially into this study. So
thank you. So Beck talked about some of the current priorities, as have Tara and Alison. The question from an audience member is how are the priorities determined? As you've talked about a little bit more, but can you tell us a little bit more about look, you said a couple of years ago there was a survey. You're going to do it again? What? How are the priorities determined?
Yeah, so we did a couple of years ago, we did a survey of our participants and also our researchers. And interestingly, there was a very large overlap in terms of what their priorities are. But just this year, we're actually undertaking a participant priority setting project. So this is a very specific type of project. It comes from the James Lind in the UK, and we're going to be surveying the participants and then bringing them into a workshop where they'll come up with the top 10 research priorities that they're interested in using their data. So it's really great, and we absolutely adhere to what our participants tell us. Alison's there to protect the participants. We are too. We're very protective of the participants, and if a project comes in that we feel that has the potential for harm, or that would result in some knowledge that can't be changed, or and would lead to discomfort or distress, then we would just say no, sorry.
Okay, I think that's really important. So I'm going to jump to this. This is a really interesting question from an audience member. It said, "Thanks for such an inspiring presentation on this incredible project. We agree. Thank you for agreeing with us. I am planning to start my first longitudinal study with pregnant women using online recruitment. And I'd like Alison and Tara to answer this question. Given I need to use online platforms, I'm wondering what recommendations you may have from the Raine study to..." They've said minimize the attrition rates, but in other words, to help maintain contact with the participants. So they're asking for advice from us about how can they keep connected with the participants. So Alison and Tara, from your own experience, what do you think has helped you remain connected with the Raine study that they might learn from?
I would say the publishing of results early, like if you constantly give feedback, it makes people feel interested. They have the advantage of actually having online, because when we started, they used to have to post out birthday cards, and the kids loved actually getting their own letter. But we didn't have email to be able to keep in touch. So I would say frequent feedback keeps people thinking, oh, wow, it was worth my time.
Fabulous. Tara, what about you? What advice have you got?
Oh, well, I definitely think that understanding of, what that data is going towards. But, we're incredibly egocentrical as people. And I think, that initial feedback on what your data means to you is really helpful for people, because, stuff might not get published for 2, 3, 5 years, and especially some of that bigger stuff. So if you're able to provide some feedback, essentially within relatively real time on the information that they've provided with you, or averages, or what you're aiming to extract from that data, that would, help keep people along.
Thank you. So
can I just add in there?
Yes.
So
Yes,
it's a great question, and we actually get contacted by cohorts and researchers from around the world actually asking that same question, because we have very high retention rates for our cohort. We often say it must be something in the water in WA, but I actually think it's a lot more than that. I think, we have some of our staff members that have been very long-standing staff members for the Raine study, some 18 to 20 years. So, for example, Sue, who was our phlebotomist, she's still with us, so people remember her driving up in this little Mirage with a big Raine study sticker on it and coming to the houses to take the bloods, of the kids, and Sue's still there. So, when you come to the Raine study house, Sue might be there to greet you. And I think that that's really important as well. I think it has become a part of the Raine study participants' identity, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Alison and Tara, but this is just what we have been told, that it, sorry, the lights go out in my office, and now not coming back on. So anyway, I'll just leave that. So, I was actually just reading a lovely little story about one of our Gen 2 participants who had a baby, and she loved being a part of the Raine study so much that she actually called her baby, the middle name was Raine, R-A-I-N-E, because it was such a part of her identity. And I thought, it's because people do feel like it's a part, they're a part of this family.
Thank you. In fact, one of the questions is about what is the retention rate? So you mentioned that about how good it was. You're dancing. So what is the retention rate of the Raine study? You said it was high.
It is high. I think it's between 75 to 80-ish% from the initial cohort, and I could be lying right now, but no, I'm pretty sure it's around about that. But it's a lot higher than most cohorts internationally. So we've been really lucky. And what we'll find is that it will ebb and flow. So, I think probably in those, probably 20 years, we might have lost some participants, but now as people are coming back, a lot of people sort of moving back to Perth and starting their own families again. And so they're, starting to come back into the study as well.
Thank you. So a question from Ted saying, I'm loving this webinar. How much of the measures that you take and the technology you use to take them changed over the years versus trying to keep them consistent to allow for longitudinal comparisons? This is a fabulous question, Ted.
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, we've tried to keep the measures consistent and the constructs consistent. However, when there are new technologies, we will also try to embrace them. So, for example, at the moment with our follow-up, we're looking at activity and sleep. So we are actually utilising newer technologies because it's better and more accurate data. So we have to weigh up the consistency across time with improved data. So that's just something that we have to grapple with constantly, and particularly now in this ever-changing technological world.
Thank you. Okay, so there's lots of questions here. There's great things to choose from. Susan P is saying, what a fantastic study. Tells us some information about her own daughter who wasn't able to be involved, but she wishes she was. Is asking, has there been any research done or planned linking a mother's mental health with their baby's well-being, for example, if they then have a stressful or sick baby?
Yeah, so that's something that we'll be able to do, particularly now that we've got Generation 3. We have done studies looking at the impact of maternal mental health on children's outcomes, not utilising Raine at this point in time, but utilising data from West Australian populations. And, we do find that, parental mental health does have an impact on children's development.
Mm-hmm. And Rosalie has asked, do you see a socioeconomic differential in people staying engaged? She said it's hard to imagine people who are food insecure or struggling to pay the rent being so involved. And, she's saying these are people are really important as well.
Yeah, no, and it's a fantastic point. And actually now that we're doing this current follow-up, that's something that we're going to be looking at is, what is, across the spectrum, because to begin with, we were representative of the West Australian population. And obviously, we're probably over time maybe a bit more biased towards the higher SES, but that's something that we can certainly look at. But when we've examined this previously, we have still had a very wide spectrum across levels of disadvantage. So we're hoping once we look at the new data, it will be the same.
Okay. Thank you. So there's also a question about whether we look for particular kind of cohorts or subsets of our participants who have particular health issues. Are there any things like that you could share with us?
I'm just trying to think. In general, all participants are a part of each of the studies that go through. So the way that it works is a researcher might get a National Health and Medical Research Council grant to look at cardiometabolic disease, and all participants will be invited to come back and have that assessment. Then throughout the use of the data, they can kind of carve off certain groups.
Mm-mm. So, I'm thinking that we have looked at, for example, things like fatty liver disease and mental health and obesity. And what about sleep apnea? Tara mentioned sleep. So we did a sleep study of Gen 2 when they were 22 and Gen 1 when their children were 26, didn't we?
Yeah.
And can you do you remember that, Alison?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
This was a big study where they actually went into the sleep labs and had the full sleep study. And just now we're seeing some, great things coming out.
Yeah, and I recall that there were very high numbers, unexpectedly high numbers of the 22-year-olds who were diagnosed with sleep apnea. Isn't that right? And nobody knew that it was so prevalent in 20-year-olds because it's considered to be a middle-aged disorder, isn't it? So that's a good example of a kind of subsection being identified with a really treatable but really important condition. Oh, let me see what else. We've got some more questions here. Have there been any studies on celiac disease and picking it up in utero?
No.
It's a good question, though.
Is, yes. And I mean, I know the Origins cohort is looking at some celiac, but now we've got our generation 3, we'll be doing we're doing the allergies as well. So hopefully be able to pick up some things there.
Thank you. Tara, you had some answers to some of these questions.
Oh,
fixed it. I just wanted to, in terms of the socioeconomic thing, I actually grew up in Kalgoorlie and probably on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. I'm, worked hard. I'm not there now for my children, but we being in Kalgoorlie and being isolated, I was still part of the study in terms of as much as they could, they would refer to Kalgoorlie. And then do the bloods and the sampling and stuff. So I think the Raine Study did whatever they could to help us, get that information still and keep us engaged, despite, there being some issues in growing up in Kalgoorlie and, less than ideal conditions. So we definitely still retained, and the Raine Study were wonderful, and I'm really thankful that they kept engaging even though we couldn't come to Perth and have the studies done.
Thank you. That's a fabulous response. So another question: have any of the Generation 2 participants had Generation 3 participants via IVF?
Well, we're finding that out at the moment, so we'll let you know in a couple of years. But I will assume that, yes, they will have, given that 1 in 20 Australians are born by IVF, and I'm sure that that's actually probably getting higher and higher.
Yeah. So another participant is asking about whether we have divided the data up based on participant demographics. So, for example, they're interested in knowing more about health outcomes for more diverse communities, or, for example, First Nations or culturally and linguistically diverse communities, and so on. So can you speak to our ability to separate out the cohort into those kinds of groupings and
some of the numbers would be too small to be able to get anything of statistical significance, particularly, so while we're representative of the West Australian population, for example, our First Nations would be about 5 to 6% of our cohort, which would, make that relatively small. Yeah.
But comparable with the population as a whole.
Absolutely,
in WA.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
But at the time,
Yes.
because our recruitment was 33 years ago, and consequently, the mix that we have is the mix of the population that was available at the time.
Yes.
That's right.
Thank you. And the mix that's coming back is reflective of the original mix as well. And the diversity that we had when we started, we've maintained because of our good retention rates. So yes, those are really good important points. Another question: have there been any consideration given to studying children's progress in literacy and numeracy and the long-term effects?
I know that there have been some studies looking at literacy and numeracy, because we actually linked our Generation 2 participants to their what was called WALNA, was the West Australian Literacy and Numeracy Assessment. It's now NATPLAN, the Numeracy National Numeracy and Literacy. And so, but I don't know that they've actually followed that through to the next level now. So, longer term, now looking at our participants who are, in their 30s. But once we finish this follow-up in the next few years, certainly that would be of real interest.
Another fabulous
We certainly
question.
have the information.
Yes,
we have the information, because Tara will probably remember, but I remember taking the little one to have reading tests and how many words he recognised. And so all that information's there. We just need a researcher who is able to get funding.
So exactly. There is one who's interested, but unfortunately it's so competitive getting grant funding that they haven't been able to get the study funded. But yes, Alison, there's someone sitting in the wings wanting to look at literacy.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's actually a really important point that you're making there, Alison. We have so much information. So just as an example, last year, the state government, the Future Health and Research Innovation Fund, announced a new grant scheme to utilise the cohort. So Origin's, Raine, and the Bustleton Health Study. And I think they were anticipating, you know, maybe sort of 10 applications, and I think there were 56 applications, over 20, I think, from the Raine study. So it just shows, you know, that there is so many researchers waiting to just tap into these data, but they just need to get the funds to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And another question, any data or learnings about infant developmental delays? So, for example, on inherited factors, low birth weight factors, infant health, well-being factors?
Oh, I'm sure that there are, of the 800 studies that have been published. I think what's also going to be interesting is looking at that in generation 3, so comparing generation 2 to generation 3, and how the parents have influenced, because now we have that information for the 2 generations. I think
2 generations. And Jane has asked a question, I think probably springs off that, is, has the study looked at the impact of the change in school starting age? So children born in 1997 were the first cohort to start school a year later if they were born in the second half of the year.
So no, well, our cohort was born between 1989 and 1992, so it's that cohort. So we haven't been able to do that, but you would be able to do that looking at utilising linked data.
Yeah, so you could use Raine Study data and data from where?
You could use linked data to do that, linked administrative data.
To
compare, outcomes.
Thank you. What is the relationship between the Raine Study and the Bustleton Health Study, says Antonia?
We work really closely with the Bustleton Health Study and the Origin Study. So as the 3 main cohorts, you know, I often say, you know, we punch well above our weight in Western Australia in terms of, you know, having population health cohorts. The 3 of us have really started working together really closely over the last 3 years, which has been fantastic. And we're talking about ways that we can, you know, sort of harmonise our data and enable researchers to easily view what is held by each of the cohorts and how they can use, you know, multiple cohorts data. So yeah, we work very closely, and we share just yesterday actually we had a great meeting with our Origins colleagues and shared some of our knowledge around cohort retention and all kinds of things. So it's great. We work closely.
Thank you. So where can members of the public read the results?
On our website, we have a Raine Study website, and we often provide little snippets of recent findings. So whenever we can, we'll update them and say, you know, here's some new findings from the Raine Study. So you can access them there.
Thank you very much. So we've come to an end of our Q&A. If you have a question that we haven't answered, we will answer you offline. So thank you so much. Look, that's the end of what I hope you'll agree with me. It's been a fantastic discussion. I want you to join me in thanking Alison and Tara and Rebecca for your very diverse and fascinating insights. Look, to sum up what you've heard today, our mission at the Raine Study is to enhance long-term health and well-being through impactful research. And I think it's fair to say that we're successfully achieving that. And it's also fantastic to learn about the support from volunteers, philanthropic efforts, and partnerships that have helped to make this possible. So thank you all for your questions. We are now out of time. We're so grateful to you joining us today and for your interest. Particular thank you to our 2 participants, Tara and Alison, and to all the other fabulous, amazing participants who've stuck with us for 35 years. Let me say that again. 35 years.
Can I just say,
yes,
that represents over 250,000 volunteer hours.
That's a big number. We hope you found it informative, including that number. And if you're interested in hearing more about any of the research, please jump onto the Raine Study. The website is rainestudy.org.au. And if you're interested in supporting the Raine Study to help us maintain our momentum, you can also donate via the Raine Study website or contact us at UWA via Jessica Carias in the Development and Alumni Relations Office. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience, and goodbye.